Hey everybody, it's Justin here, and I'm here to do your on-campus small group coaching lesson for you for the date of March 30th, which is coming up pretty soon. So we're going to be in Mark chapter 14, verses 12 through 31. It's actually a pretty extended passage, but it's a very good passage that has a lot of different things that go well together. You've been in this Possessed series for a while now. This is actually the one that's going to be concluding that series. So what we're going to do is kind of tie in something that Brett has been talking about over the course of the past several weeks, and it's the point that you can trust God. So ultimately, this lesson is going to be a little bit weightier, a little bit heftier than you usually present, and that's because you're going to be using some terms that you're probably not familiar with and your people probably aren't familiar with. You're going to be talking about some theological ideas that are a little bit more ethereal than you usually do. So it'll be a little bit more difficult than normal, but it's not anything that's like earth-shatteringly difficult. So these are all concepts that are capable of being grasped. We're going to be talking about in this lesson God's omniscience and how that applies to how you can trust Him. So the doctrine of omniscience is very simply the fact that God knows everything, and we're specifically going to be looking at Jesus, the person of Jesus in the Godhead, and how Jesus knows everything, and because He knows everything, you can trust Him. So if you take out your lesson, I'll be walking through this with you. I'm not going to be reading it to you or anything like that because I have utter confidence in you guys and your ability to read. But what I will be doing is just kind of giving you a couple of tips and suggestions as we go along. So you see there on your first page that the primary teaching point is very simply that Jesus knows everything, and because He knows everything, we can trust Him. He knows everything that was, everything that is, everything that will be, and everything that could be, and because of that, we can trust Him. So if you keep going down a little bit there, you'll come into your introduction. It's a very simple introduction that looks back over the course of the last few weeks in the Possessed series, so nothing really out of the ordinary there. But as you segue into the actual teaching of the text, which is going to be found on page 4, you will find that you're going to be breaking this down into two different categories. One, the first thing that you're going to be building the idea that you can trust Jesus on is the fact that He knows everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be. And you're going to be looking at three different passages from Mark chapter 14 on this. As you walk through them, you're going to need to probably have some people at the ready because you're going to be doing a lot of jumping around in the text and also a lot of side texts, a lot of supporting texts from the Bible that you're going to be using. So you may want to go ahead and just get some volunteers at the beginning and go ahead and get them to look up those texts as you go through and just have them at the ready, because otherwise you're probably going to be holding it up as people flip pages or click on their phones or whatever it is that they're looking at these passages on. So you'll start in Mark 14 verses 17 through 21 talking about how Jesus knows everything. Verses 12 through 16. The first section is where Jesus tells His disciples to go into the city, and they're going to find a guy that's walking with a water pail and to follow him until he goes into a house. And when he goes into the house, they'll ask the master of the house where that they can have the Passover feast. So over the course of this passage, Jesus shows that He knows a lot of particulars about this. He knows that there's a particular servant on a particular road headed from a particular well to a particular house, and Jesus really illustrates that despite the fact that He's outside the city and in Bethany and not anywhere near this, He has perfect knowledge of everything that's going on and everything that was going on and everything that's about to go on. And so you'll be building that point from this passage. Then you're going to jump down to Mark 14 verses 17 through 21, where Jesus continues to illustrate His perfect knowledge, where He makes it a little bit more personal for the disciples, because now they're sitting in that upper room and they're having their Passover feast, and He looks around and He says, one of you is going to betray me. And He shows that He knows, we know looking back from our own hindsight, that Jesus gets this right. He knows that somebody's going to betray Him, and He says it's going to be one of you that dips the bread, and they look around and they're wondering, who is it? Surely not me, Lord, surely somebody else. And He knows that there is a betrayal coming. And then you're going to actually jump from there to one last passage in this text. You're going to skip over a short section of the chapter 14, and you're going to jump down to verse 26 through 31, where you see that Jesus makes it even more personal, and he looks at every one of his disciples, and instead of just saying, one of you is going to betray me, he looks at them and he says, every single one of you is going to tuck tail and run. When the Son of Man goes to the cross, he says, every one of you is going to abandon me. And Peter, the bold one that we usually give the bad rap to, he steps up and says, surely, even if everybody else runs, I will die with you. And Jesus looks at him and very specifically predicts, before the rooster crows twice, you're going to deny me 3 times. Over and over again in these passages, Jesus shows that he knows everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be. And what your job as a teacher is going to be to do is to show your group that Jesus has this perfect knowledge of everything going on. From that point, you'll be jumping around in a few different texts. You'll look at the woman at the well where he looks at her and says, you're right, you don't have a husband, you've had 5, and the one you're with now isn't your husband. And you'll see that Jesus knows her, this perfect stranger, knows her perfectly. You'll look at the passage of the 4 men and the paralytic. This is all on page 6. You'll look at the passage of the 4 men and the paralytic where the Pharisees are reasoning in their hearts. So why does he say this? And Jesus says, why are you reasoning in your hearts? And he knows exactly what they're thinking, what's going on inside of them. He has perfect knowledge of that. You'll see the passage of the fish and the coin where Jesus looks at Peter and says, go and catch this fish that's going to be on this particular side of your boat and pull him in. And when it's the very first one you pull in, he's going to have a coin in his mouth, and go pay that as the temple tax. So he has that perfect knowledge. And then at the end of it, after you get done with all that, you're basically going to be showing them that Jesus knows everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be, but it doesn't stop there. His omniscience goes further than that, and you're going to be showing that he also knows what could be. This is where your lesson is going to get a little bit more difficult for people to grasp. Like I said, it's nothing earth-shattering, but it is going to be a little bit more in the concept phase. You're not going to be dealing with concrete things, more ideas here, but you're going to look at the passage that you already looked at in Mark 14, verse 21, where Jesus looks at Judas and says, it would have been better if you had not been born. And from that, you're going to have your group get ready because they're strapping on their vests. They're going into the deeper water. Because in this, you see that Jesus doesn't just have perfect knowledge of everything that was, is, and will be, but he also has perfect knowledge of everything that could be. Everything that is a possibility, he has perfect knowledge of. So here you're going to be telling them about God's middle knowledge. This is one of those things where in the realm of theology, your deeper theologians tend to break God's omniscience down into 3 different categories. There is what's called God's natural knowledge. This is his perfect knowledge of everything that is naturally true. 2 plus 2 always equals 4. The color blue is always blue. These are things that God knows just because they are. They are real. They are naturally always the case. So God's natural knowledge. Then you have God's free knowledge is the second category, where he knows everything that he chooses to be true. These are things like Jesus is coming back one day, Jesus died on the cross. These are things that he chose to be true and willed to be true, so they are true. And right there, smack dab in the middle of it, you find something called God's middle knowledge, and this is his knowledge of all that could be. Not necessarily things that are naturally true, not the things that he wills to be true, but the things that could have been true otherwise. And these are all built on something, a term that you've probably never heard of, or your group has almost certainly never heard of. It's a term called counterfactuals. A counterfactual is very simply something that is not true, but if it was true, then something else would change. So I put an example here in your lesson that says if Brett didn't have hair, he would be bald. I mean, clearly Brett has hair. It's spiky, it's unruly, but it's up there. It's not true that he doesn't have hair, but if it was true that he didn't have hair, then he would be bald. Something else would be true. It's a counterfactual. It goes against fact, but if it was true, something would be different. And so you look back at what Jesus said to Judas, and what he says is, it would have been better for you if you had not been born. Judas was born, so that's not true. He wasn't dead. He was obviously born. But Jesus said that he understood and knew perfectly in his knowledge that if Judas had not been born, it would have been better for him. And what you will do at this point is you're going to build on a couple of different passages from Matthew that show a couple of different counterfactuals. So Matthew 11:23, where Jesus looks at Capernaum and says, had the special, I guess, signs and wonders, the miracles that he had performed in Capernaum, if they had been done in Sodom, Sodom would still be around. It wasn't true that those miracles had not been done in Sodom, but if they had, Sodom would still be around. And the same thing in Matthew 12, you see there on page 7 that if these religious leaders had understood a concept from God, then they wouldn't be condemning Jesus' disciples. It wasn't true, they didn't understand it, but if it was, then they wouldn't be condemning the disciples. You're going to show these two examples and know this is very simply a realm of theology that people dive into pretty heftily. If you're interested in learning more about this, I mean, you're just scratching the surface. If you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend, you'll see on your teaching tip there on page 7, that you check out Salvation and Sovereignty by this guy by the name of Kenneth Keithley. He actually was one of my professors at seminary. Really smart guy, and he very, very well outlines the idea of middle knowledge. Your purpose, however, for this lesson is just to show that God knows everything that could be. Not just what was, not just what is, not just what will be, but everything that could be. Because the point that you're driving at is very simple, that God has perfect knowledge of you and me, and He still died for us. He knew how crummy we were, how sinful we were. He knew how dirty our minds are, how rotten our hearts are, and He still chose to die for us. He knew everything about us perfectly and still died for us. And the point that you're making is that God is trustworthy. That He loves us so much that He is willing to do that for us despite His perfect knowledge of us. Therefore, He can be trusted. And you see that passage that we jumped over, that we skipped in the middle, is from Mark chapter 14, verse 22 and following. It's a passage where Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper, which you guys will be partaking of on this Sunday. In that particular passage, Jesus looks back and He says, here are these elements, and according to 1 Corinthians 11, He tells them, do this in remembrance of me. I mean, He clearly gives them the bread to help them remember His body, and the wine to help them to remember His blood. Jesus knows that we don't have perfect knowledge of everything. We don't have perfect knowledge of what was and what is and what will be, and we certainly don't know all of the possibilities of what could be. But what we can do is look back on the one who does know that stuff and remember that He is with us, that He promised to never leave us or forsake us, that He promised to be with us always, even to the end of the age, and that He promised to give us everything we need to do exactly what He wants us to do. He tells us to remember. So the group will be actually partaking in the Lord's Supper in the worship gathering this morning. So at that point, you're going to be asking your people to spend a few minutes diving into the truths of this lesson. So you'll be telling them to take out their small group handout, which is on page 11. You can see that. I mean, it's all pretty self-explanatory, so feel free to look over that. And the conclusion that you're going to make is very simply that everybody there is going to have stuff that they're going through. Everybody's going to have problems. Everybody's going to have sin that they're struggling with. Everybody's going to have difficulties that life is throwing at them. The one universal truth that you can lean on is that God knows all that is happening and that He is worthy of trust, that He loves us enough to do what's best for us, and because He knows everything that's going on and has a perfect view of everything in our lives, we can trust Him. And that's the point that you're going to be driving in this lesson. So I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that it works out for you, and good luck in all that you do. Bye.